Welcome, everybody. In today's episode, we dive into a topic on so many potential investors' minds. And that topic is, can I replace my income in 10 to 15 years so I can jump ship from my corporate job that I'm liking less and less every day? It's such a common question, and real estate portfolios can act like a W-2 income by covering expenses, offsetting taxes, and appreciating over time. David and I share our personal journeys and strategies such as leveraging FHA loans, living with a ton of different roommates to keep expenses much lower than normal, and a few other ideas to get to this financial freedom by overcoming anxiety and taking action by viewing this as a business and not as some sort of side hustle or hobby. You're going to like this one as it relates to many of you listening right now. I can feel it. Let's get right to it.
Ever wonder what burn your boats means? Picture this: 10, 15, 20 years from now, you are living your best life. You are not bound by the chains of a W 2 income. You're traveling, watching your children grow, being present in their lives. You're fulfilling all of your dreams and ambitions. Burn the boats is a powerful metaphor for making positive changes in life and moving forward despite challenges. It means creating a new reality by breaking free from old habits, people, and tools that hold you back. Burning your boats is when you realize your worth, your value, and you make the choice to create change. Clark and David are successful real estate investors who understand the importance of wealth creation and breaking free of financial anxiety. They believe that anyone can achieve this by thinking differently, learning new skills, and saying no to things that do not align with your goals. This podcast highlights pivotal moments and milestones in life that can set you on a new path towards realizing your full potential. Make the choice to join Clark and David and their guests as they share their own experiences and what they have learned to do and not to do in real estate investing, and share how you too can start your journey in creating meaningful wealth and live the life you deserve.
Such a cool topic that I'm looking forward to talking about today and hitting on many key points, David. And what is that topic? And it's a big question we get all the time, which is, how do I buy rentals to replace my job, my active income over the next 10 or 15 years? And it's such a hot button in today's kind of climate. So, David, nice to see you again. How are you doing? Tell me a little bit about your thoughts on this topic.
Thanks, Clark. It's great, obviously, to be here to talk about what is, as I've said in previous podcasts, I've spoken to maybe well in excess of 2,000 investors in my life, and I've heard this topic come up 2,000 times.
Yeah.
And it's, how would you possibly buy rentals that would replace my income, in 10 or 15 years? How would I possibly do it? I earn $250,000. Like, what's a piddly $300 a month going to do? I'll need to own, 500 of them to make that work. And fundamentally, this conversation is what stops investors from moving forward because they don't understand how it really
Right.
works. So this is we're going to talk about a lot of stuff on Burn Your Boats, but this is one of my favorite mysteries that we're going to solve, hopefully, for the listeners today, Clark.
And the amazing thing about it is that it's very cool because me and you are kind of going through a bit of a pivot in our kind of our real estate journey, and we're kind of active proof. So it's going to be very fun, and it's going to be very easy to talk about this topic. And we're not having to project, we're not having to estimate. We can just tell you from experience, because it's happening to us right now, the power of what being able to buy these first rentals in your first 10 or 15 years, what it's enabled us to do that's so much bigger than I ever would have dreamt of when I bought my first or second property where I was making $126 a month. What do you think on that one?
You know what, Clark? I have lived, since as far as back as I can remember, I've lived in a state of financial anxiety. When I was a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old and I wanted those cool shoes, my mom wasn't buying them. I can tell you that much. So if I wanted anything, I had to go kind of hustle for it and get it. And so I've had my head down kind of most of my adult life. And it's an absolute epiphany when you get to a point and you build up, in this case, a real estate portfolio that over time you are running and running, sprinting and running, getting up every day, chasing your tail. And then one day, somebody almost had to grab me and hold me by the shoulders and said, David, you're okay. You're okay. Look at this. Look at how much, cash flow is coming in here monthly. Look at what our expenses are monthly. Look at the equity in these homes. Look what this, whole ball of wax looks like. You don't have to go to war today. And that was a pretty profound experience to go through. And it is also amazing to me how many people who work professionally full time in their W-2 jobs in real estate, could be realtors, a lot of wholesalers, a lot of flippers. And then, I'm just talking about that group. It's amazing how many of people who are in the coalface every day and still don't understand the topic that we're going to talk about today, which is how to buy rentals and replace your active income in 10 to 15 years. So first of all, Clark, you and I have talked about this ad nauseum together, but let's remind our listeners right off the top, what is an active income fundamentally, and what does, like, you go to work every day, you earn $200,000 a year, 250, 300, whatever the number is. But what does it fundamentally do for you? What does an active income do? Do you want to just let's just get that out there first so that we can dig into what a real estate portfolio does fundamentally. So can you go through that, Clark? What does an active income do?
So it's kind of just black and white, right? You've got an active income, and essentially what it does is that it covers your expenses, okay? Your monthly expenses and your weekly expenses, and it's going to cover your taxes, so it keeps the tax man happy, okay? And the third thing it does is it helps to, if you're smart, you can save and invest the remaining piece. You can go blow it on whatever you want. So in essence, a W-2 active income does three things for you. It keeps the tax man happy. It keeps a roof over your head, and it pays your bills and puts food on the table. And then that delta that you have, if there is a delta, and most people that are listening to this podcast have a delta. And what do you do with that delta? Are you saving it and investing it, or are you blowing it on things? Or are you doing kind of a hybrid of both, right? But which is slowing down your growth. So just to kind of set the baseline, that's what an active income does. And that's what you can use the money for, David.
So let's just go through that just real quick. So somebody earns $250,000 a year. Let's say $70,000 a year of that goes on taxes. Okay. Let's say most people have monthly expenses, of at least $10,000. Yep. Cars, rent, mortgages, and so on and so forth. So that's $120,000 a year of expenses, of just life expenses. That's $70,000 a year of taxes. So we're up to about $170,000 of your $250,000 income. And so what you're saying is that there's about $70,000 left from a
Right.
$250,000 income. That
Yep.
if you're smart, you'll go and invest it rather than blowing it on fancy cars and watches and junk and, you know, overtly expensive vacations and stuff like that. So right there, we're talking about so few people choose the latter, which is the investing side of it, and choose the former, which is the spending side of it. But let's stick with that, you know, because I've spoken to a lot of people and they don't want to wait 20 years. They don't
Yeah.
want to wait 15 years to splash out and indulge on themselves. But fundamentally, they're the three things. So if you're lucky and you're on $250,000 or $300,000 a year and you don't have lifestyle creep, you might have about $70,000 a year to invest. Is that the starting point here?
Yeah, let's use that as kind of the foundation in terms of you've got $50,000 to $70,000 to be able to invest in whatever it is you want, whether you want to blow it, whether you want to put it in stocks, real estate, whatever that is, right? So here's I think the biggest challenge is, David, I've got $60,000 in this case. I'm listening to this podcast. I've saved up 60 grand from 2023, but why would I buy a house with these high interest rates and it makes a piddly $200 a month, right? And you know, I think that a lot of people are going to look at an investment property through this lens where they basically add up, okay, what are my expenses? What is my rent, right? And what's left in between. And in most cases, right now, it could be $0 in our area, but let's just say that it's $150 or $200 a month. I can see how it'd be so difficult to get over that hurdle of spending 60 grand so that I can make $200 a month. And then not only that, right? But now what happens when my property manager calls me and says the tenant's not paying? What happens when the faucet breaks? What happens when this goes wrong and there's mold or there's a break-in or you could spend an hour talking about the different issues. Why would anyone do that? That sounds horrible, right? This podcast is called Burn Your Boats and it's focused on wealth creation. How would you ever create wealth through $200 a month on a $70,000 investment?
I've heard that so many times, and I love it because it is fundamentally challenging. It's very easy to understand why somebody would find that entirely trivial. You know, $300. You know, it's absolutely trivial and uninspiring amount of money. But and then what? So they're never going to invest. But the real truth of the matter is they are not. They're looking at a basic pro forma day one investing, and
Right.
that's not how real estate works. That's just a simple guide as to how to understand. Okay, if I buy it for this, my costs are that, my rent is this, my expenses are that, and I got $300 left over. But to most real estate, or excuse me, to most higher earners out there, $300 a month or no dollars a month, but let's talk about $300 a month. It doesn't fundamentally matter to them whatsoever, right? And it's irrelevant. It's an irrelevant amount of money, and yet people make these massive decisions based on, is the $300 a month there or is it not there? Why that is irrelevant is because how real estate actually works is on December 31st, at the stroke of midnight, when everybody else is singing Old Lang Syne, what also has happened at that moment in time is the clock has stopped on the tax year. And so when you go and you file your taxes, that's actually when you fully understand how your real estate is actually performing. And so let me explain a little bit about this. And we're going to go into this a little bit deeper in a later episode, but there's a lot more going on than that $300 a month. So your rent is coming in, but if you have a real estate portfolio, and then you have a spouse in the family, you can claim bonus depreciation right away. And so if you have somebody who's involved in real estate, you can take your portfolio every year and bonus depreciate the depreciation of your property. Then you can also take regular depreciation, which is 4% of the value of your portfolio every year, and write that off against your taxes. So I'll give you. I want to really fundamentally dig into this before we go any further. A real estate portfolio acts very similarly in time to a W-2 income. A real estate portfolio will do the same three things. Over time, a real estate portfolio will pay your expenses. So let's say your expenses are $15,000 a month, right? So that's $130,000 of net income required to cover that. But a real estate portfolio will also, because of bonus depreciation and actual depreciation and all of the other tax incentives that are within real estate, almost all real estate professionals I know pay little or no income tax on their income because they're always acquiring. They acquire real estate primarily to write off their taxes. Okay, so we'll go into bonus depreciation in depth in a different episode. So a real estate portfolio can pay your expenses. It will pay your expenses. A real estate portfolio will offset almost all of your taxes, if not all your taxes. And then the simple fact, we were talking about that $60,000 left over. What do you do with it? Well, a real estate portfolio is appreciating every year. Your income is going up every year. The mortgages are being paid off every year. So you might pay off to $300,000 worth of mortgages on an annual basis. And so the portfolio itself is acting as a 401k. So if you're,
Right.
I want to just draw the similarity again. A W-2 income will pay your expenses, pay your taxes, and if you're lucky, have some income left over so that you can invest or play. Okay. A real estate portfolio will pay your expenses, will depreciate almost all of your taxes, and by its very existence, it is always appreciating and growing, and your net worth is growing every year. So real estate portfolio and a well-paid W-2 income can act very similarly. Okay. And so I understand that $300 a month is very trivial. What we're going to talk about in this podcast is how you get to that relationship where a real estate portfolio and your W-2 income are almost doing the same thing, So I understand people don't invest whatsoever in in the concept of getting $300 a month in cash flow. But Clark, what do you think about what I've just said? Do you understand, does your real estate portfolio now behave much more like a W-2 income than a ball and chain around your neck for the first 10 years that you were buying? So, you tell me.
Yeah, and I appreciate you kind of going through that. And it's so hard when you're first starting off to see the forest through the trees, right? And it's been hard for me too. And I have, looked at my real estate portfolio as I've grown, kind of like you mentioned 401k, and I love that you mentioned that, because if you invest in a 401k, right, you just kind of blindly put money into it. If you get a company that'll match you, it just kind of comes out of your paycheck and you don't even really think about it, right? And if you can kind of have that same mentality for building your real estate portfolio, then I think you're going to be much more successful, because you're not going to necessarily see the highs and the lows, whether your value goes up a little bit or down a little bit. Ultimately, the trajectory is going to be up. And so I am seeing it right now. So I've been kind of full, very much vested in real estate on a more active level over probably the last 10 to 12 to 14 years. And I'm finally able to kind of look and see, what, my cash flow, I looked at this prior to this episode. I don't have one rental that's not cash flowing at least $500 to $600 a month, right? But it may have started at 100 or 150 or zero or whatever the case may have been. And so it's starting to actually cover my expenses now, right? Now, am I going on vacations every week? Of course not, right? And that's not kind of the goal of this, but it's been a nice security blanket. And that has been the exciting thing. And guess what? I just finished on a week ago. I finished on a refinance where I was able to refinance the entire portfolio, David. And I was able to keep the payment the same. Okay, so my payment didn't go up every month. I'm going to still cash flow about the same. And I was able to pull out about 150 grand, give or take, of tax-free money, right? So, but it's taken me 12, 13, 14 years of kind of just keeping my head. You mentioned earlier, keep your head down, right? I've kind of kept my head down. I've kind of tried to keep my expenses, at a reasonable pace. And I was able to walk out of the closing table with $150,000 of tax-free money. Okay. But it's just because real estate has just worked slowly in the background. Okay. And that's impactful. $150,000 isn't going to necessarily change my life. But it doesn't, it doesn't hurt a lot. So what have you seen, David, on your side as to, kind of the journey, especially through those first, 10, 12 years per se, where, you're making mistakes, you're buying some things that maybe weren't the best decision in the world. What did you kind of see through those that kind of the takeaways from that?
So, I'll happily answer it, but I just want to just very quickly, reiterate that, the concept of you earn $300,000 a year, $300,000 a year, and real estate, these $300 a month, I've got to replace that. That's
Right.
wrong. Remember, you're not trying to replace your income through real estate. Your income is broken up. Your $300,000 is broken up into segments. Like that's your expenses. So the first thing you're trying to do is you're trying to cover your expenses. So always understand what your expenses are that you're trying to cover, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so then real estate will pretty much eliminate your taxes. And then real estate itself is an investment vehicle. So to answer your question, and this is very personal for me, right? Because, financial anxiety is not nice. And I have, I went through a number of different times in my life where I was, pretty high levels of financial anxiety. When I moved over to the States first, and when I left college and I was on my own, $200 in my pocket on day one, living in San Francisco with, 10 friends on the floor, that's pretty high. Like, that's fun, but it's high levels of financial anxiety.
Yeah.
There are, in 2007 and 2008, when things were looking very, very squarely, and I was in the real estate business, that was not nice because I didn't have a portfolio. I had a high income, but I didn't have a real estate portfolio that covered my expenses at that time. And so I was going backwards, and I see it an awful lot now. There's a lot of, people who are losing their jobs now. It's one thing to have a $200,000 or $300,000 a year job. That's all fun and games until that job ends. Somebody burns
Stops.
your boats.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's fundamentally important to understand that for me now, right, I took that seriously. I took 2006, 2007, 2008 seriously. I did not like that feeling that, the skills that I had and the things that I were doing at that time were not valued by society. Okay.
Yeah.
People were not wanting to buy real estate. People were not wanting to invest in real estate. And so if you don't have savings, are one thing. We put savings aside and we say, okay, well, this is for a rainy day. That's fine. But nobody likes the financial anxiety of spending your savings. That's that on itself is not nice. When you've got a nest egg, it could be 100,000 or 200,000, and then you're chomping into that every month, and you're kind of, it's great to have it. I'd much rather have it than not, but it's still not nice. So it's important to understand in life that most things are pretty high entropy in their nature in terms of your job. Most people, I'm not talking about everybody, I'm not talking about you specifically as a listener, but most people don't work more than 10 years in their job. Something happens. Industries, whole industries are subject to entropy, right? AI is coming down the line. That's gonna shake things up a lot. And so if you don't think that your income is subject to entropy, you're probably wrong. You might have a very valuable skill today that won't be a valuable skill in the future. So we build real estate portfolios not because they throw off $300 today. We build, and this is to answer your question, we build real estate portfolios so we insulate ourselves in 10 or 15 years from the inevitable entropy of what your W-2 or your active income is now. So you're making $300,000 a year today. That's great. Are you always going to be able to earn that? Because here's what's really going to happen. Something's going to happen to your job, or you're going to have kids, or you're going to need to be at home more, or you're going to want to be at home more, or you're going to, Lord forbid, you have an illness, or you have an unwell parent. If you have a spouse that also works a heavy corporate job and you're both feeling flush now, throw 3 kids into that mix. One of you is most likely going to have to take a step back from that. And so entropy is always working away at that quote unquote high income job. And so why we build up real estate portfolios when you are earning high income, it's not to make the $300 today. That's irrelevant, meaningless. We build up a real estate portfolio so that in 10 or 15 years time, Clark, and the inevitable entropy kicks in. It could be a big recession. It could be you lose your personal job. It could be something happens to your personal life. That at that point in time, you understand your monthly expense. You say, well, it costs $15,000 a year or $12,000 a year to run this family, to run this household. And I bought these piddly $300 a month rentals 10 years ago. But guess what hasn't changed? My mortgage payment hasn't changed. So I bought that rental for $150,000. That rental now is worth $430,000. That I bought that at the time the rent was $800 a month, and my mortgage and all my expenses at that time were $799 a month. We're getting $1 of cash flow, but that didn't matter because now my mortgage and my expenses creep up a little bit, insurance and things like that. But my mortgage and expenses, to use that example, are now $1,000 a month because my mortgage is the same. But my rent, that $800 rent, is now $2,500 in rent every single month. And so I now have $1,500 a month of monthly cash flow from that one asset. I also have approximately $350,000 worth of net worth banked because the mortgages have been paid off by my tenants, and inflation and the market forces have driven my values up to 420, 430. You choose a number, doesn't matter. And so if you have enough of those over a 10 and 15 year period, let's say we have 10 of those throwing off $1,500 a month. Now, I don't need to tell you what that is. That's $15,000 a month of free cash flow. Let's say you have 20 of them. Now you have $30,000 a month net hitting your bank account if you go to work or not. Now imagine you lose your job. You don't care. Now imagine AI is creeping up on the world. Do you care? Not really. Now imagine there's a big recession. Do you care? Not really. because your tenants are still there. They're still paying rent. They're still creating net worth on your behalf. So the personal example you asked me for was, how do you feel essentially after 10
Right.
years? And let me tell you, in real estate, because I have been a fix and flip guy for the last, 10, 12 years. And I've earned pretty high income in the fix and flip world. But when interest rates rose recently dramatically, guess what happened to my fix and flip business? You're right there. You're my business partner. What happened?
I'm with you. It slowed way down very, very quickly, whether we liked it or not, right?
Did we have to maybe let a few people go, maybe
Oh,
slow
we
it
did.
down, protect the downside, right?
Do we have some difficult conversations, some things that we didn't want to have to do? But ultimately, the market doesn't care about our employees. The market doesn't, the Fed raising interest rates doesn't care about our business, our employees, our wherewithal. And ultimately, we did what we had to do, right? We had to pivot very quickly. So
You're you're saying Jerome Powell doesn't care about our fix and flip business? Is that what you're
I
saying?
wish you would. We don't send in enough money. We don't donate enough, apparently.
But something really important also happened in the last year. I alluded to the fact that somebody had to put their hand on my shoulder and say, David, it's okay. Because I've run on this, financial anxiety fuel all my life, essentially.
Yeah.
And both
Hey,
of us stopped. We had a meeting. I remember that day we walked inside and we sat down and we compared notes about what our personal residual income is from our personal portfolios, your portfolio, my portfolio. I asked you to do a deep expense review, and you had your ducks in order. You were able to pull it right out, show it to me. I was able to show you mine. And so we were able to just say, well, listen, my expenses are this, my income is this from my portfolio. And at that point in time, it's a mind blowing moment when you're like, hold on here, we're about to go through a really big shift in real estate. We still had to have some flips and get them off our books or refinance them or put them in, a different bucket. But the bottom line is neither you nor I had to worry about our income whatsoever.
mhm.
And what we will do now in this podcast, because the podcast is about how to build a portfolio. So what we have been talking about for the last, 30 minutes is about why it's important to understand that $300 on day one is irrelevant. And so many people stop because they think they're just meaningless.
It's hard to quantify, David, what you just said about essentially the market fired us from our current business, right? They said, you know what? You guys are flipping. It's in an up market. There's not a lot of risk as long as you buy it right. The market will bail you out. And the market basically said, no more, no more. You're fired, right? And I don't know how you quantify this on a spreadsheet, but the ability to have the wherewithal to step back and say, our portfolio performs at this, it still kicks off this much income. It's kind of irrelevant what the market's doing. The tenant's still in a 12-month lease. Whether the interest rates go to 8% or 7%, they still have a lease that says they owe me $1,500 a month. And if they don't pay it, then there's consequences for that. To have that feeling of such a low amount of anxiety. How many times do people get fired from a job and they don't really have that business working in the background of investments? How stressful is that? How much anxiety do you have? How much sleep do you lose? How does that compound down to your spouse and your kids and your family and worried about all these things? And I don't care if you
It
make.
can cause
Yes, so much. And it's not about whether you make 50,000 a year or $300,000 a year. Because let's be honest, if you're making $300,000 a year, you have a $300,000 a year type car. and a $300,000 a year type house mortgage payment. When if you're only making 50 grand a year, then you have a lesser car and a lesser house, right? So it's all relative at the end of the day, regardless of how much you make. If you get fired, God, how much stress and anxiety, right? In essence, what happened in the last 6 to 9 months with our business that me and you have together is we got fired. And you know what? I think we have less stress now than we did 9 months ago when we were in the trenches, flipping 6, 7 houses a month, dealing with contractors, dealing with this, right? So I don't know about you, but I don't know how to express on a spreadsheet what the feeling is of low anxiety, low stress, and the excitement that we're able to now step back, look around, smell the roses in the garden, and feel like, what's next? Like, what is next? What can we utilize our skill sets to be able to do something much cooler? You tell me how you put that on a spreadsheet. It's not, I haven't been able to figure that out yet.
It's not on it, is it? It's not on a pro forma. It's not on an IRR sheet.
It's
It kind of
not.
is on an IRR sheet, ironically
It
enough.
is.
If
Yeah,
you
you're right.
map out,
Yep.
it's not on a day one pro forma, but actually it is on an IRR sheet. And we're going to do an episode on what an IRR review on a property is. And if you don't know what that is, just real quick, it's a internal rate of return, and it maps out what your returns will be, in year one, which are awful. We all know that. But in year two, in year 10, in year 15, and year 20, and you can just see it literally maps out. We can use really, really conservative estimates for inflation and for the increase in rents and the increase in our costs. And it factors all of our taxes, it factors all of our appreciation, all of our amortization, all of the inflation. It takes that huge big ball of wax that I was talking about earlier in the podcast, and it gives you where you will be on your 5 and your 10 and your 15 and your 20. And quite honestly, the back end of your portfolio from year probably 13 and 14 onwards, your returns just go parabolic.
Yeah.
And if you have enough inventory at that point in time, so to actually extrapolate on what you just said, where we are now, quite simply, if you're listening to this, is Clark and I, our expenses are being fully covered by our tenants.
Yep.
Our net worth is growing every day because inflation, amortization is just happening, if we like it or not. But more importantly, if we do nothing, we're going to continue to have this parabolic growth as our mortgages go down and our rents go up. And it just this income divergence, income and cost divergence as your portfolio grows. You can see it in an IRR sheet. So fundamentally, what this podcast should really have been about is how to understand how real estate really works. But we promised that we would talk about how we would build a real estate portfolio in 10 years' time. And so, I'll go first. I have a thesis, and then this is for you, the listener. You might find the next 10 minutes really interesting. Clark and I are not here to agree with each other every week. The reason we thought we'd be good co-hosts is Clark sees the world very differently than I do, and Clark's experience of how he got from 0 to 20, 30 doors, and from 0 to being my business partner, and how I did are very, very different. And so we share very, very different journeys, very different paths. So, Clark, my thesis is there's a time in your life, if you're lucky and you're listening to this and you identify with this, there's really two buckets of people who are out there. There's the people who are currently high earners listening to this podcast now. You might be earning 300,000, 400,000. I know some of my clients who are earning 500,000 and 600,000, and some of my clients who are business owners earn $1 million a month. So there's different types of people listening. So that's bucket. You might be that high earner, but if you own a business or if you've got a high paying job, don't think for a moment that your job or your income is not subject to pretty high levels of entropy too. And the entropy is not just your job, not just the fact that your industry might be suffering from entropy, but you yourself might be 42 and you just don't like going anymore. That in itself is like, I can't do it anymore.
Yep.
So if you're in that high income bucket, this is, you are who I speak to. Okay. You understand and learn that you're probably only going to be in that bucket for 10 or 15 years before you don't like it, you don't want to do it, or something burns your boats. And so every year, from as soon as you wrap your head around the fact that $300 a month is irrelevant, every year buy a $300,000 asset at a minimum. So 20% down, that's $60,000, buys you a $300,000 asset. If you can do that, year one, buy a $300,000 home. Year two, buy a $300,000 home. If you can step it up, in year five, put 20% down, buy a $500,000 duplex. Year six, another $500,000 duplex. Year seven, every year up that until you can buy, because remember the cash flow and the equity from the first few assets is starting to kick in now. And now I have a rule of thumb for most of my investors who are reasonably high earners. I ask them to think about buying $1 million worth of real estate every single year. There's so many other parts to that, as in it will erase a lot of their taxes. It will do a lot of things, but $1 million a year, but do it for 20 years. So first few years, 300, 300, 300. You'll notice I'm not talking about doors. You'll notice I'm talking about asset value. And so I suggest starting out buying very high quality, A-class assets. You don't care about the cash flow. You're earning $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year. Cash flow is irrelevant to you. What you want is you want to start putting seeds in the ground in great locations where you're fixing your costs now, where the income will continue to rise, the value will continue to rise. So buy a $300,000 house, $300,000 house every year till you can buy $1 million house or $1 million quadplex, let's say, every single year. Do that for 20 years. And you'll pretty much have a $15 million portfolio visualizing for day one. And over a 20-year period, real estate between inflation and appreciation generally doubles over a 20-year period. So that $15 million portfolio that you've acquired in 20 years' time, that's going to be about a $30 million portfolio. Your remaining mortgages on that at that time might be $7 million. Think about that. You owe $7 million. You have $23 million worth of equity. And at that point in time, in 20 years' time, your net cash flow could be $50,000 a month, $100,000 a month. And so I have seen professional investors do that. And it is how I achieved, it's that level of discipline. Every year now, and every year for the last several years, I try to buy as much dollar value, not doors, but as much dollar value of real estate that I can, high quality real estate. And then at some point in time, I guess I'll stop at some point, but I haven't stopped yet. But, buy yourself that level of assets every year and have the discipline to not buy the boat, to not buy the Mercedes, to not go to Tahiti. Have that discipline for 10 years of your life so that when these inevitable entropy kicks into your life, into your career, one day something will happen and you'll look at your own portfolio and go, my expenses are, $15,000 a month and my portfolio throws off $27,000 a month. I don't have to worry about this recession. Clark, over to you. How did you do it?
Yeah, I like that a lot. And I agree with a lot of the same concepts you bring up to kind of bring in the way that it's easy to talk about when I just explain kind of my quick journey is the number one thing that I take that you need to take away from this is that If it were easy, everybody would do it, right? So you're gonna have to make some sacrifices. You're gonna have to delay some gratification. It's just that simple. I don't care which way you look at it. If you're worried about buying the boat and you're taking on that example earlier, we've got the $60,000 or $70,000 of income to spend on whatever you want. If you're spending 50 on the boat or boat like purchases and you're only leaving 20, you're just so slowing down the ability for the compounding effect, right? So in what I did is I kind of leveraged the FHA loan and roommates. It's that simple. So I'm more of like I'm just going to buy. I'm not going to say, well, I want to buy $20 million. That's my end goal. My goal is just what's right in front of me to make the quickest actionable step. So to give you an example is like, instead of me saying I want to lose 20 pounds this year and get in better shape, my goal is to say, I'm just going to go to the gym and twice as much as I did last year, right? So I may lose 20 pounds, I may lose 15, I may lose 25, whatever that is. But ultimately, am I going to be happy with losing 15 pounds? You're damn right. I'm going to be happy with 15 pounds, right? So for me, I kind of have like a little bit smaller vision, and it's not a good thing. I think as I mature, I have a bigger vision. But when I first started out, it's like, how do I get my first house, right? So if we're looking at a 10-year period, right, and I want to buy a house every year or every other year, right? So even if I only buy 5 houses instead of 8, so what? I still own 5 houses. How many people in this country own 5 houses, right? So I'm going to break it down for you. And I think I'm going to give you one caveat, David, is that a lot of times you hear people say, well, buy this house or buy that. But what if people are like, well, I don't make $250,000 or $300,000 a year. I make $68,000 a year, right? So I don't
Yep.
have I
Yep.
don't have $60,000 a year to put on the first house that's going to buy a $300,000 asset, right? So you have to think differently, and you have to think and you have to delay your gratification a little bit, right? So the way I started is I bought a crappy townhouse and I got roommates, right? With an FHA loan. So I only put 3.5% down on a $80,000 townhouse, right? So it's what is that with closing costs, 5-6 grand, whatever that is, right? I bought that townhouse and I immediately put tenants in it. My mortgage payment wasn't very much, right? And then I cut it in half because I had a roommate, right? So again, even though I wasn't making a lot of money, I was keeping my expenses so low that I was still making a decent amount of money at the end of every month, right? So then what do? You only get one FHA loan, David, at a time. You don't get more than one, right? So then I saved up a little bit of money and I bought my next house with a conventional loan with like 5% down, right? And then I lived in that house. I moved to that house and I still rented out the first house. I didn't sell it, and I rented them out by the room. It was only a 2-bedroom. So instead of having to deal with one person to collect rent, I had to deal with 2, not the end of the world, right? So I did that again. And then what I did is by the time I saved up enough money, again, this is a marathon, not a sprint, right? If you look on social media and you believe all the hype is that people are buying houses every 15 seconds, it's not true, I promise you. So if you're not buying a house every 6 months, you're still doing fine, I promise, right? So by the
Yeah.
time I got to my third house, right, now the first house had gone up enough in value to where I could refinance it out into a conventional loan, okay, and I kept the same mortgage payment. I actually shrunk the amortization period on the term from 30 years down to 20 years, right? So I have the same mortgage payment, okay. I have a shorter loan period, which means I'll end up paying less interest on it. Now I've freed up my FHA loan to now buy the third house with 3.5% down. And guess what I did with the second and the first house? Again, put roommates in it and rented out each room so I could get a little bit more money. And then I managed it myself, right? So I didn't have to pay a property manager. And guess how much knowledge, how much experience I got dealing with tenants and things like that. You think that knowledge has helped me through the years as I've gone to buy, new assets? So ultimately, I leveraged that FHA loan, which is so important to get in, use it, live in the property. So the cheat code to being able to not maybe have $60,000 of liquid cash to buy that 300K asset is you got to live in it. Okay. And you got to know that it's not going to be your forever house, and that's okay. Right. You only have to live there for a year technically, and then you can move out and rinse and repeat. So I was able to build up 8 houses in 10 years. Okay. And I think here's the most important thing. And this is something that most people don't like to share because it's rude. David, is it okay for me to ask you how much you make every year? Is that rude in our society? Hell yeah, it's rude, right? You don't just go up to a stranger on the street and say, "Hey, by the way, I see you drive a nice car. How much money do you make?" Right? It's just not an acceptable thing. For that 10-year period, I made anywhere from $30,000 up to 150. So let's just call it a blended kind of average of about $100,000 per year. Okay, that was the average. So I think it's important to understand that with $100,000 a year salary, okay, that I made, I was able to acquire 8 properties in 10 years. Okay. And I did it the exact same way where I would buy these properties, I would rent them out, rent out the rooms, I would keep my expenses low, and it's possible. So I want you listening today that maybe doesn't own any properties, maybe you make 50 or 75 or 100 or $150,000, and maybe you're not quite as much of a high income earner. It's possible, but it's not free. You can't just go out and buy a property normal way, put down 20% and really cash flow anything. Maybe you have to live in it for a year. Maybe you have to put a roommate into it. Is that the end of the world to be a 28-year-old with a roommate and living in a neighborhood that's not a top tier network or a neighborhood on Bayshore Boulevard in Tampa, Florida? It's going to be okay. You'll live, you'll survive. So I think that the takeaway, hopefully, if you're listening to this and maybe you don't own any properties, you own 1 or 2, is if you're able to just live in it, use that house hack. Live in it yourself. You're going to get the best interest rates, right? You're going to be able to you're going to control, you're going to understand the house. You're going to be able to repair it a little bit as you live there, right? So you maybe do small upgrades while you live there. Get some damn roommates in there to keep your costs down. And that in itself is how propelled me to 8 houses in 10 years. It's that simple.
I think that's great advice. I really do. I'm listening here. I took a different route, but I'm listening here and I'm loving it. That there really, there's a way in for everybody. And so, this is an important topic today. And what the listeners want to know is if you were high interest rates, prices are pretty high right now. You got, some people sitting on the sidelines saying, "Oh, I'm going to wait for the market to crash. Or I'm going to wait for this." We're going to do a separate episode on that thinking and why it's so incredibly wrong. But this episode, hopefully you can see during this episode why that is not the smartest way of thinking about life. But if you were starting out right now, and you can identify with financial anxiety, because you will continue to identify with financial anxiety until you have income that exceeds your expenses. That's just for me, anyhow. It's just how I operate. So if you're starting out now, from zero houses, and you wanted to build up a portfolio so that in the next 10, 15, 16 years, and remember, listeners, those 10 years are going to go by in a heartbeat. You're just going to be living your life. This portfolio, this real estate thing, does its magic actually quite quietly in the background of your life. It'll come in and, hassle you from time to time. It'll give you a little pain in your butt. And we'll talk about in a separate episode about the psychological bullets, about how to survive owning a real estate portfolio emotionally. That's a separate episode. But for today, remember that 10 years from now will be upon you before you know it. And a lot of things in your life will have changed. And 10 years after that, so 20 years from now, will be upon you shortly. It's coming down the tracks faster than you can think. And you will most likely be a very different person then in 20 years. You will think differently. You will act differently. You will have different things that you want to do. You'll have different things in 20 years' time that you want to spend your time on. So if you're here now listening, we're at the end of that process. So much I wish I knew at the start of this process. That's what Burn Your Boats podcast is about. But if you're starting today, high prices, low or no cash flow, high interest rates, Clark, what would you do to get started and to continue for the next 10 years to grow a portfolio so that one day you will be financially free?
Yeah. So it's pretty simple. and I'm going to say this over and over again, is you you can't grow a portfolio if you don't own anything, right? And if so, the
Right.
easiest thing to do, high interest rates, high prices, it's very simple. Buy a house that you're going to move into. You're going to get the most favorable. You're going to get the lesser of many evils. You're going to get the most favorable terms in this high interest rate climate. Buy a house, move into it, get the best rate, put roommates in there, um, and paint the walls, cut the grass, put some landscaping in there, make it nice, and make sure that whatever your mortgage payment is that if the rent in the neighborhood that you're living in is similar. So if your mortgage payment is $2,000, make sure that the market rents are about $2,200 to $2,300. That's the quickest and the easiest way to get started. You have to live somewhere, right? You're not going to live under a bridge. So you got to have a house to live in. You might as well get your real estate journey through that. And you're going to take so much away from that. And then if you're willing to delay your gratification, put up with some slight inconveniences of a roommate, right? You get to choose your roommate. So, more than likely there's so many avenues right now with Facebook and Craigslist. And there's so many ways to be able to pick the right roommate you think. That is the easiest way to get in, and that's it. And if you don't do those things and you just constantly sit around and complain that the prices are too high, I'm going to be a renter my whole life. If you have that mentality, then you're right. You're exactly right. The prices are too high. The interest rates are too high. You shouldn't have a property to start growing your wealth. But if you're like, you know what, I'm going to make some small sacrifices and I'm going to take action and I'm going to buy something, right? That is the first step. And you just do it today. Like at the end of the day, we started this conversation with 10 years, right? The house that I bought 10 years ago, would it have mattered if I paid another $20,000 for it or $15,000
Not at all.
less for it, or I didn't get a deal when I bought it 10 years? Do you think any of that matters, right? It is so irrelevant, right? So don't get stuck in the now, which is looking at just the cash flow today. Take action, stop making excuses, and then you will start to learn and you will grow and you will get to the point where we're at currently, which is so important. This is what I'll leave you with is if someone walked up to you and tapped you on your shoulder, David, and let's say you have a job as a W-2 doing whatever it is you do and said, hey, thank you so much. You did a great job, but your services are no longer needed. How would you feel? Are you going to feel stressed? Are you going to have anxiety? Are you going to worry about what's your payments next month? Or are you going to have a feeling of like, oh, well, that kind of sucks, but not a big deal because I've got this huge, comfy safety. It's like the bouncy house, right? That saves you and it has that safety net, right? And that's what we have right now. I'm not going to Tahiti every week. Okay. I'm not out at the casino every weekend blowing money, right? But we've got this safety net. The anxiety is low, and I'm so excited about the newer, better things that we can look for in the grand scheme of things. So I'll leave you with that. What about you, David? What
That's
what
great
do
advice.
people need to do?
You're saying that you can start out, just to reiterate, you can buy a 4-bedroom house, live in one bed. So let's say you're currently renting, you're paying $2,000 a month with a roommate. So you're paying $1,000, right?
Right.
But you could go and you can, with an FHA loan, put down like whatever, 9 grand and take your $1,000. And let's say it's a $2,200 a month rent. Let's say it's all in for 25. You can take your $1,000 that you're currently spending. You can move into one of the bedrooms, and then you can have 3 friends move into 3 different rooms, paying $800 a month. So now you're making, $2,400 a month, right? They're paying all of your mortgage, and your $1,000 a month now can go into a savings account every single month towards buying your next property. Is that what I'm
Yeah.
hearing?
Yeah, the only difference is that the $1,000 a month, okay, I would suggest is that goes into a separate bank account, okay? Because guess what's going to
Yep.
happen? I guarantee you stuff's going to break and stuff's going to happen. And so when that stuff breaks, you're going to go to that business account, you're going to get your checkbook and you're going to write a check out of there to pay the plumber $500 and you're going to move on with your day and you're going to forget it even happens, right? But now you have a plumbing thing that's fixed, right? But you're still going to work every day in creative active income where you save the money to get the first house. You're just going to do that again. And what it does is it creates the ability to not get emotional when bad stuff happens. The roommate moves out or the faucet breaks. I don't care what it is, right? Because you have this nice separate account where you're actually making a little bit of money, and you're going to take that money and do that. And if
Right.
you have that mentality, then you're going to be fine. But if you're depending on that $300 a month that you're making as like your extra spending income, then you're listening to the wrong damn podcast, and you need to go listen to something else, because this isn't the one. That $300
My
has to go to a separate bank account, and it only is
my
used for expenses on the house.
Yeah, we've got a whole podcast on that one as well, which is separating real estate as a business and your life is your life. All of your real estate income goes into a bank account so that you're not emotional. All right.
Yeah.
In preparation for this podcast, you heard us talking, or my wife heard you and I talking in the background, and she chimed in and she told me, which I didn't know, that in 15 years of buying investments and taking rents in and cash flow, in 15 years, I have never taken a single dollar out of my real estate bank account. I didn't know that.
That's
Not
crazy.
one. I never made a distribution. So that the quote unquote $300 a month.
Right.
I'm 15 years in, and I've never taken a single cent real estate portfolio, because all of that income goes in there, and it goes towards the next down payment. It goes towards the next roof replacement. It goes down to, like, we are always keeping our properties updated, and we're always buying new properties. And so
Yep.
I have a different take. So if you were to start today, you go down the FHA route. What I look at it differently, because I did it differently, in that I burned my boats completely in my life when I understood that for me, the skills I had, the education I had, the person I was fundamentally wasn't suited to working a W-2 job for a boss, going slow, begging for a salary increase every year or so, going into reviews where people are telling me what they like about me or don't like about me. That world just wasn't for me. And so if I was starting out right now, I would absolutely learn things like marketing, very valuable skills. I would work for myself, and I would accept only working for myself in something that is absolutely scalable, so that if you're working $100,000 or $200,000 a year job, it's very addictive, very easy to get into that world. But remember that $100,000, $200,000 a year job, you're going to have to pay taxes on it. You're going to have to pay your own expenses, and you might have a little bit left over to invest. I went about it a different way. I'm going to go high income. I mean, super high income. I get into the fix and flip world, or I got into the non-salary capped real estate commission world, if you will. And so I just worked my tail off. And so the way I built up my portfolio was I worked, I worked hard, but I never had a cap on what I could earn. And so if I made $500,000 a year, you make $1 million a year, you make $200,000 a year. You can toggle it. You can decide what you want. But if I was starting out right now, I would learn things like drop shipping. I would learn things like marketing. I would learn things like buying businesses. Highly recommend educating yourself immediately on how to acquire small businesses, because there are millions and millions of baby boomers retiring over the next 5 years, and they own HVAC companies. They own everything, vacation companies, and they own property management companies. They own landscaping. They own all sorts of businesses that are out there that are not salary capped, and they're not sexy. So the idea is like, yeah, I live in New York and I'm a trainee fashion designer. Totally get it. It's very, very egotistically stroking, right? Very artistic. I'm very passionate about my job. I don't know how many people are passionate about printing, buying a, whatever that small business might be. It might not be your passion, but if it's something that is scalable and it's something that is repeatable and it's something that you can very quickly put a template together and all you just print the same thing. You just, rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat. So if I were in starting out now, I would insist that I buy a business, start a business, or otherwise be in a skill set that was not salary capped, where I could earn far more money right now and than I would in any W-2 that would pay me, particularly me, because they're not going to pay me all that much. I don't have the resume for it. And then that's only the first part. That people think, oh yeah, I earned $650,000 last year. I'm rich. No, you're not. You got a $250,000 tax bill about to smack you in the face. That's what you've got. And so that is only the first step. And this is the part I wish I knew this sooner. That income that you have bought, or that income that you have generated, or that skill that you have is subject to entropy. It will slow down. It will change. It will stop. You could double down and open up other businesses, but eventually, trust me, you will want to slow down. And so as soon as you start earning more than your expenses, so we all have to pay our expenses, we all have to pay our taxes. But as soon as you start earning excess income, buy real estate, buy 300,000, like put 60,000 down, put 100,000 down, buy your first $400,000 quadplex or duplex. Do it again. Do it again. Do it again. So when you are a high earner, because it's a small part of your life that you will be a high earner when you are in your 20s and 30s, buy as much of these doors as you can. Don't worry about the $300 a month. That's irrelevant. Put doors under your belt. At the end of the year, you're going to get such massive tax breaks. High income tends to be a certain degree of high stress. You have employees, you have a lot of capital,
Always.
you have financing
Yep.
things. So high income is high stress. That's even if you have a W-2. The more you earn in a W-2, most likely the more stressful and demanding your job will be. Conversely, the more you earn as a business owner, the bigger your business, the more stress that will be. And so at some point in time, you'll want to decouple from that stress. So you don't need to earn a high income forever. That's the whole point of this podcast. You need to only earn a high income for a short period of time so that you can plant those seeds in the ground, $1 million a year, $1 million or $500,000 assets. So put $100,000 down, $500,000 asset, $100,000 down. Do that for 10 years or 12 years or 13 years. And then you can take your foot off the gas and just let time do all of the hard work for you. And then when you want to not be the high earner, and let's say your expenses then are $15,000 a month, your kids and your cars and your health insurance, and you want to go to the beach, you want to take the summer in Europe, or you want to do whatever it is you want to do, that cash flow from your assets got to, you might have 2 times your expenses or 3 times your expenses come in every month, if you like it or not, right? You have to do a thing. And your net worth will continue to grow for the rest of your life, and you're not at work. So that's what I would do. I would very heavily focus in on high income now. Don't accept a salary cap. Understand that in your 20s and 30s is when you've got this opportunity to make the high income. And then the time of ownership. We've all heard it's time in the market, not time in the market. There will come a time in your late 40s or early 50s when when you run out of steam, and this income will absolutely liberate you. So that's what I would do. Get into a high income job. I wouldn't spend it on boats. I wouldn't be upgrading my lifestyle. Every single dollar you get, put it into real estate. That's what I would do.
So there it is, David. There's two viewpoints, two different ways to go about it, and everyone is a little bit different. So I'm sure that a lot of people can relate to your story, and probably a lot of people can relate to mine as well too. So with that being said, I think this gave the listener a lot of things to take actionable steps and understand that there's a bigger picture. And if you're just if you take away anything from this, is if you just stop looking at an investment and just go into the bottom of a pro forma that shows how much money you make on a cash flow, and you start to realize that it's a much bigger thing, and it helps to be able to provide you with less anxiety and stress and a safety net and all these things. But it takes time. It takes a little bit of sacrifice. It takes hard work. There's no shortcut. This isn't get rich fast. And if you're okay with that, knowing that you're going to defer that income, you're going to do very, very well. And we want to help you get there. So any parting words, David, before we sign off on this today?
No, just super passionate about this subject. I really enjoyed that. There was quite a few burn your boats moments in this podcast. And so it's called Burn Your Boats for a reason.
Exactly.
And I hope if there's a takeaway from this, it's the following. You're not trying to replace your income. You're trying to cover your expenses, pay your taxes, and have asset value that's constantly growing. You're not trying to replace your income.
That's it. I love it. So with that being said, we appreciate you listening, and we're here for you. If you ever want to reach out, you can get us at contact@burnyourboatswealth.com, and we'd love to interact with you and help you in any way possible. And with that, we will see you next time. Thanks so much, guys.
Great episode. Thanks, Clark.
You've been listening to the Burn Your Boats podcast with Clark Lunt and David Shaw. We would love to hear from you. Please reach out at burnyourboatswealth.com with comments, questions, and if you have a topic you would like Clark and David to discuss on an upcoming episode. We would very much appreciate it if you took the time to rate and review Burn Your Boats podcast on your favorite podcast listening app, and make sure to follow and share on social media. Content in Burn Your Boats podcast is for entertainment purposes only and is not legal or financial advice. Please review our legal disclaimer at burnyourboatswealth.com. Thank you for listening.